excerpt from the Americans with Disabilities Act training, Session B for managers. Now let's focus on managing a current employee with a disability. You may be in the situation where a current employee comes to you and claims to have a disability. Here's what you should do to ensure fairness and consistency. As we've discussed, the ADA defines a disability as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of the major life activities, for example, seeing, hearing, walking, speaking, learning, or breathing. The law also says that a record of such impairment would cover an employee, or being regarded as having such an impairment. That would make them a qualified individual with a disability, as long as they could perform the essential functions of the job. Managing an employee with a disability is really the same as managing all staff. What's critical is respect, maintaining confidentiality, and working with your internal experts to determine the appropriate accommodation and response to an inquiry. Let's look at the elements you'll want to have in place to ensure that the ground has been laid for fair treatment of all employees through job analysis, job descriptions, performance expectations, accountability, and reasonable accommodations. Job analysis is an important first step. Many employers do not have well-documented processes to determine the essential functions of the job. According to the U.S. EEOC, or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, most jobs require that employees perform both essential functions and marginal functions. The essential functions are the most important job duties, the critical elements that must be performed to achieve the objectives of the job. Removal of an essential function would fundamentally change a job. And marginal functions are those tasks or assignments that are done occasionally and are not as important. The ADA applies the test that essential functions are job-related and consistent with business necessity. The process of job analysis involves the incumbents in the position and collects data about how often a specific function is performed, particularly regarding the physical dimensions of the job. Activities such as sitting, standing, reaching, walking, squatting, and so forth. Also regarding lifting, how many pounds are lifted and how frequently. Without a thorough analysis of the job, tasks included, results expected, tools and equipment used, and environmental factors, it is harder to make the case that your expectations are job-related. Regarding job descriptions, the ADA does not require written job descriptions, but a well-drafted job description is very important for many reasons. The job description should detail the essential functions, as well as the education, experience, technical skills, interpersonal skills, and language skills that are required for the job. The job description should also cover essential functions, as well as functions that are performed occasionally. This is important to determine if any person is qualified for the job, but it is also helpful for any discussion about reasonable accommodations and certainly any discussion regarding workers' compensation or return to work considerations. The job description should detail other elements, such as reporting structure, details about exempt or non-exempt, working hours, location, pay grade, and other details. Technical skills should detail any tools and equipment operated, and the physical dimensions of the job should detail the work environment and any physical or mental demands from the job analysis phase. The job description should also make it perfectly clear the type of work, specific activities, and demands of the job. Any job description should be confirmed with incumbents and supervisors to ensure that the functions are current and accurately reflect the requirements of the job. Regarding performance standards, you want to maintain accountability. Any employee should be clear on the quality and quantity of work that's expected, any behavioral standards, goals and objectives, and how performance will be tracked and monitored so everyone is clear about the expectations. This process usually takes place in the annual review, and align individual and team goals to departmental and organizational goals. Managers should expect the same level of performance for all employees, regardless of their disability status. Constructive feedback is essential in all managerial relationships. All employees in the same or similar positions should be held accountable for the same behavioral expectations and performance standards. Make sure those expectations are clearly communicated to all employees and that all managers are consistently holding people accountable for them. If an employee is not meeting one of your expectations, managers and supervisors should be quick to engage in coaching, training, counseling, or corrective action. And this is true of managing all your direct reports. Go back over the performance standards and ask the person, is there a reason why you are not meeting these expectations? Have an open dialogue about the challenges they are facing and what you can do to support them. For example, with training, tools, or other support. These are standard discussions you would have with any staff member who is not performing up to standard. Let's talk a bit about unknown disabilities. Many employees with disabilities may not want the employer to know about their condition and may be hesitant to come forward with the information that they have been diagnosed with a disability. They might be embarrassed or fear losing their job security, or they simply might not want to be labeled as a person with a disability. Or perhaps the employee is not aware that their rights may be covered by a law, particularly if their condition is depression or another mental illness. The issue may come up when performance is impacted. So simply ask, is there something we can do to help you? This simple question will let you know if the employee has any issues that might be impacting their performance, attendance, or behavior. If this is the case and you have an employee assistance program, referring the employee to the EAP can be a good resource as well as great support for the employee. At this point, you don't want to have a discussion about their medical condition, but if they respond with details, mention that you are not inquiring into the specifics, but you do want to assist them, and suggest that you get HR involved. An HR expert who likely has some expertise in managing reasonable accommodation, leaves of absence, and other issues related to the ADA. Recall that the ADA requires an interactive process to determine the best accommodation, and that process is best handled by an HR person or other expert that can discuss the employee confidentially and interact with a healthcare provider to determine the best accommodation. Employers, by way of HR or other designated personnel, may ask for medical certification. The employer is not required to get or pay for the diagnosis for a disability. The medical examination should provide insight into the essential functions of the job and whether the employee is able to perform those essential functions and if the employee can perform the work in a safe manner. Reassigning marginal or occasional tasks. Essential functions are those job duties that an employee must be able to perform with or without reasonable accommodation. Those should be stated in the job description. And according to the EEOC, factors to consider in determining if a function is essential include the following: whether the reason the position exists is to perform that function, the number of other employees available to perform the function, or among whom the performance of the function can be distributed, and the degree of expertise or skill required to perform that function. Other considerations are the actual work experience of present or past employees in the job, the time spent performing a function, the consequences of not requiring that an employee perform a function, and could be the terms of a collective bargaining agreement. Marginal job functions are those that are not the primary reason a position exists, and modification and/or removal of marginal functions from a position is an example of a possible reasonable accommodation. So it's important to delineate essential and marginal functions, since it's not usually required that you strip out an essential function as an accommodation, but reassigning a marginal function may be an appropriate accommodation. An accommodation might be assistive devices, a change in schedule, time off for treatments, or other changes in work arrangements. Here are some examples of reasonable accommodations. You could have equipment or tools, software for speech recognition, special glasses, tools and equipment. Those all assist employees in doing their jobs and can be very useful. There's also automatic page turners, book holders, and adapted pencil grips, adaptive switches and utensils, screen readers, and screen enlargement applications. Or it could be a scheduling change, allowing an extended period of unpaid leave to recover from a medical procedure, permitting a later start time to accommodate an employee's medical treatments, providing rest periods throughout the day to accommodate an employee's disability, or other changes in schedules. Could be mobility aids, such as wheelchairs, scooters, walkers, canes, crutches, prosthetic devices, and orthotic devices. Note that in some cases, an employer would not be required to pay for equipment used outside of the job, but would need to allow the use of the equipment. Again, it depends on the circumstances with the accommodation you're providing. And other accommodations would include installing a ramp to make a workplace wheelchair accessible, modifying a restroom so a worker with disabilities can use it, changing the layout of cubicles to provide enough room for a wheelchair to pass, or providing a raised or adjustable desk. Many of these architectural and structural accommodations are required for accessibility into the workplace. Other examples might be changing the rules to allow an employee to bring a service animal to work, or adjusting the policy surrounding flexible work schedules or working from home. The Job Accommodation Network is a wonderful resource for insight on various disabilities and possible accommodations. They can be found at askjan.org. The ADA's requirement is for employers to make reasonable accommodations unless the accommodation would cause an undue hardship on the employer. An undue hardship could be asserted in terms of the organization's financial resources, the burden on other employees, the size of the organization, past examples of accommodation, or other considerations. Performance reviews. Like evaluations for all employees, managers should be clear and constructive with feedback. People should be evaluated on predetermined performance standards. The evaluation should never mention the employee's disability or condition due to confidentiality issues. You certainly wouldn't want the employee's disability to be used against them in the future. Remember that the evaluation is a part of the regular personnel file, and information relating to any medical situation, leave of absence, medical diagnosis or prognosis, prescriptions taken, or reasonable accommodations should not make its way into the formal evaluation form. And realize that the employee's job may have been altered due to reassignment of marginal functions, so their performance should be based on those adjusted standards. Regarding any disciplinary action, as a manager, you may be hesitant to subject a disabled employee to coaching, counseling, or corrective action. Remember that the ADA does not protect people with disabilities from being disciplined. It only protects them from being discriminated against because of their disability. The law only requires that the discipline be job-related and consistently applied. Regarding confidentiality, remember that all medical records are confidential, and all information relating to the employee's medical diagnosis, prognosis, doctor's notes, or prescriptions is considered to be confidential. These documents should not be kept in the manager or supervisor's files. Rather, a separate medical file should be created, and the file must be kept separate from other personnel records, meaning in a separate drawer, file cabinet, or room, with security precautions taken to ensure the safekeeping of medical records. The same goes for any verbal disclosure of medical information. While it might be nice to share a medical concern of a coworker with staff, any and all verbal disclosure of the aforementioned medical information would be equally as problematic. By the way, this is true about most medical leaves of absence, accommodations, workers' comp details, and other information of a medical nature. If a person asks why their coworker has a certain piece of equipment, a shift change, is not required to stand for the entire shift or receive some other accommodation. Simply respond that you are not at liberty to discuss any information relating to any employee's work arrangements. In summary, remember, the intent of the Americans with Disabilities Act is to protect people from discrimination due to their disability, not to give them unfair advantage because of their disability. The intention is to make the workplace available and accessible to everyone and put everyone on a level field in terms of being hired and the fair application of the terms and conditions of employment. Good management of all employees requires consistency and fairness. All employees need clear expectations and fair performance standards, open dialogue about their performance, and constructive feedback that is supportive and helps everyone meet their goals and objectives. Keeping these tenets in mind will result in a more equitable and inclusive workplace for everyone.